Have you ever noticed that every war begins with a good justification? There's always a villain ready, an enemy to defeat, and a noble cause to defend. But behind the flags and patriotic speeches, there's a much colder game, and it's rarely about justice. When the U.S. announced the attack on a Venezuelan ship carrying drugs, the world applauded, until it realized that what was at stake wasn't fighting crime, but control of the continent itself. Trump, with his unique ability to transform crisis into power, returned to the world stage as the protagonist of a new conflict. One fought not only with missiles, but with strategy, contracts, and influence. He didn't just attack a ship, he attacked the geopolitical balance of Latin America. And while the headlines spoke of international security, the behind-the-scenes revealed something quite different: corporate interests, secret agreements, and a silent dispute over territory and energy. But what seems like just another military crisis may actually be the beginning of a new era. An era in which wars are fought not for conquest, but for narrative. In which winning isn't about dominating through force, but convincing through information. And that's exactly what we'll explore today. What's really behind the U.S. attack on Venezuela, and why this episode could redefine the future of global power. The attack that shocked the world on that sultry Caribbean morning. The sea seemed calm, until radar began recording the unexpected. A Venezuelan ship was intercepted by U.S. naval forces, claiming it was transporting tons of drugs. Images circulating in the early hours showed fire, smoke, and confusion, as news outlets competed to see the truthful version of events. The world watched, perplexed, as yet another U.S. move into Latin American territory. But those who follow history know, when the U.S. moves a piece on the board, it's rarely on impulse. The attack wasn't just a response to trafficking, it was a message. A direct message that Washington is willing to regain control of the routes and influence it thought were lost. What few realized is that this episode could mark the beginning of a new phase of silent disputes, which take place long before the first shot is fired. And while the public was divided between the official version and alternative theories, something bigger was beginning to take shape behind the scenes. Trump, with his long-standing ability to turn crises into a stage, was already preparing his next move. The ship sunk in Venezuela wasn't just a military operation. It was the trigger for something that would soon completely change the geopolitical map of the continent. The ulterior motive behind the attack, behind the rhetoric of fighting drug trafficking? Something didn't quite add up. Official U.S. reports mentioned only a routine action, but the operation's sea routes curiously coincided with oil exploration areas disputed between Venezuela and Russia's allies. Coincidence? Unlikely. Experienced analysts saw the attack as a carefully calculated maneuver, a way to stake out territory under the guise of morality. Trump has always understood that modern wars are won not only with weapons, but with narratives. By framing the attack as a crusade against international crime, he won public support while strategically repositioning American power in South America. Amid the cameras and headlines, few noticed that the real interest lay beneath the ocean: oil, gas, and influence. The old power game, reenacted under new banners. Venezuela, mired in internal crises and economic sanctions, became a perfect symbolic target. A weakened, isolated country with coveted resources, the kind of fertile ground where empires often plant their liberating missions. The attack was just the first move in a broader play, and the following chapters would reveal how far Trump would go to ensure the world remembered who really calls the shots. Trump returns to the game with full force. Trump has never been a man to shy away from chaos. He turns it into a spectacle. Since his rise, he has learned to use every crisis as fuel for his own power. And this attack in Venezuela was a perfect example. While the world was still debating what had really happened, he was already before the cameras, with his firm tone and calculated gaze, promising to cleanse the Western Hemisphere of drug trafficking threats. What seemed like a military declaration was, in fact, the beginning of a carefully rehearsed campaign. Behind the scenes, Close aides revealed that the plan went far beyond the fight against drugs. Trump sought to restore the United States' image as an undisputed power, and at the same time, regain the trust of Americans tired of seeing their country retreat in the face of emerging powers. The attack on Venezuela was the perfect symbol, a gesture of strength that recalled the decisive power many believed had lain dormant since the Cold War. He wanted to show he could still move the world with a single command. But there was something even more calculated about this move. Trump knew that in times of uncertainty, people seek leaders who appear to have control, and by expanding the war, he wasn't just attacking a ship. He was rewriting his political narrative, reigniting nationalism, and projecting a new phase of American influence. The stage was set. The world was watching, and Venezuela now became just the first act in a script that promised to expand far beyond the borders of the Caribbean. The reaction of Venezuela and its allies of Venezuela's response was immediate and furious. In a televised address, President Nicolás Maduro called the attack an act of war and vowed to defend every inch of our national territory. The streets of Caracas filled with protests and flag-waving, but also with uncertainty. Many feared that this verbal retaliation could escalate into a direct confrontation, something the country, already weakened by years of economic crisis, would struggle to withstand. Meanwhile, behind the diplomatic scenes, Moscow's hotline rang again. Russia officially spoke out against the attack, accusing the U.S. of blatant imperialism. China, silent as ever, limited itself to calling for dialogue and respect for sovereignty, but discreetly moved its merchant fleet into the Atlantic. Cuba, a longtime ally, offered logistical support and intelligence. It was the resurgence of an old global polarization, a world divided between those who support and those who fear American power. But the real game was being set up away from the cameras. Private conversations in Geneva, encrypted messages between foreign ministers, and silent alliances were underway. The attack on the ship had lit a fuse that could reach unpredictable proportions, and while Trump reaffirmed his continental cleansing mission, Maduro's allies began moving their pieces cautiously, aware that any misstep could escalate an incident into a global conflict. The game of international interests behind the flags, patriotic speeches, and moral justifications, there's always the same fuel: self-interest, and in this case, literally, oil. The attacked region is one of the richest in unexplored reserves off the Venezuelan coast, and it's no coincidence that American and Russian companies have been waging a silent war for influence in that maritime strip for years. The attack, therefore, wasn't about drugs. It was about energy dominance, access to shipping routes, and control of the economic future of an entire continent. While the U.S. sought to bolster its military presence in the region, Russia and China intensified trade agreements and billion-dollar investments in Venezuelan infrastructure. It was an invisible but brutal dispute, in which every political decision carried enormous financial implications. Whoever controlled those waters would control part of Latin America's energy supply, and, consequently, the balance of power in the hemisphere. It was the old global chess game, played with new pieces. And as in every power play, there were also intermediaries: banks, private companies, and defense corporations profiting from instability. While headlines spoke of just war and war on drugs, energy and arms markets soared. Each bombing was followed by a surge in the stock market, each fiery speech by a multi-million-dollar contract. And so, under the pretext of protecting the world, the powerful continued to fuel a system where war becomes, paradoxically, the most lucrative business of peace. In times of war, there are those who lose, and there are always those who win. While governments trade accusations and missiles, real power moves in the glass offices of large corporations. Investment banks in New York and London were already adjusting their portfolios, betting on arms and energy companies. Each explosion in the Caribbean sent the shares of Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and even private security companies hired to keep order soaring. It's the old routine: chaos as a catalyst for profits. Behind the scenes, The oil lobby exerted silent pressure on Washington. Confidential reports circulated among advisers suggesting that a stricter blockade of Venezuela would open the way for indirect exploitation of its reserves by Western companies. The sanctions, presented to the public as punitive measures, were in fact strategic gateways. They drove out competitors and created fertile ground for new contracts. War, in this scenario, was not a tragedy. It was an investment. And the most curious thing is that, while powers fought over territories and trade routes, small countries and their populations became mere pawns. Hunger, unemployment, and forced migration were the collateral damage of decisions made in air-conditioned meeting rooms. Trump, aware of all this, used the rhetoric of Great America to mobilize emotions. But he knew perfectly well that behind the patriotism lay a cold logic. The global economy feeds on fear. And when fear grows, money flows, economic and diplomatic consequences. The first repercussions came where the world always feels them most quickly: in the markets. Within days, the price of a barrel of oil soared, stock markets fluctuated, and Latin American currencies plummeted. Investors feared the conflict would spread along Caribbean export routes, creating a new global energy bottleneck. The United States, while anticipating the impact, knew this surge would strengthen its own energy companies. The war, once again, was pushing money toward the same destination as always: the coffers of those who started it. Diplomatically, the effect was devastating. Neutral countries were forced to take a stand, and old alliances began to fracture. The UN Security Council became the stage for fiery speeches and cross-examinations, while European leaders struggled to balance morality with economic pragmatism. Latin America, in turn, found itself divided. Some governments discreetly supported the U.S., fearing sanctions. Others, more courageous, denounced the operation as a violation of continental sovereignty. The continent was once again fragmenting, as in the Cold War. But the most profound impact was symbolic. The attack revealed how much the international system had become hostage to corporate and geopolitical interests. Diplomacy seemed like theater, where the words peace and justice served more to decorate speeches than to guide actions. And, behind the scenes, new secret meetings began to emerge. Neighboring countries feared they would be the next targets of an increasingly unpredictable foreign policy. The tension was palpable, and in the midst of it, Trump smiled. His strategy was working. What this war really means for the future. Ultimately, this war was never just about drugs, oil, or territory. It was about control. Control of the narrative, of information, and above all of the global perception of power. The attack on Venezuela represents a symbolic turning point. The return of a global politics where fear is the most valuable currency. The future that is unfolding is not that of a new Cold War, but that of an invisible war, waged through influence, data, and manipulation. Whoever dominates the mind will no longer need to dominate the earth. Trump understood this like few others. His strategy is not just military, it's psychological. He knows that by stirring fear and nationalist pride, he unites the people under his voice and transforms any action into defense of the homeland. While some see arrogance, others see leadership. While some call it tyranny, others call it courage. This duality is the new battlefield, a world divided between those who believe in narratives and those who try to decipher them. And perhaps the real danger lies not in weapons, but in indifference. Every time a nation accepts the official version without question, a part of global freedom is lost. The attack on Venezuela is more than a military event, it is a wake-up call, a reminder that power, when disguised as justice, becomes nearly unstoppable. The future of geopolitics will depend less on who has the strongest military and more on who can convince the world they are on the right side. History repeats itself, but not everyone realizes when it begins. Every fiery speech, every intercepted ship, every peacekeeping mission hides something bigger. Signs that a new era of conflict is brewing before our eyes. The U.S. attack on Venezuela is more than an isolated event. It's a reminder that the world lives on the brink of a spark. The question is, how many can see it before the fire starts? While most people are distracted by headlines, true strategists observe the silent movements of powers, the flows of money, the disguised alliances, and the agreements that never reach the press. The future of humanity can change in a single dawn, and when it does, it won't be by chance. The difference between those caught off guard and those who prepare lies in knowledge. So if you want to understand how to identify the signs of a global conflict before it explodes, I prepared something special for you. You download the ebook 10 Signs That a War is About to Start now. A straightforward and revealing guide that explains what the news doesn't tell you and what governments would rather you didn't notice. The link is pinned to the top of the comments. And before leaving, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the next episodes will expose truths that are closer and more dangerous than you imagine.